where I've been living the whole, thanks. I've been living for 22 years in Southwest Detroit, about 4 blocks from the current border crossing. And for that whole time, since I moved in, there's always been impacts of what that development has meant. But the impacts really increased when trade policies, when NAFTA policies passed in the mid-90s. Because as an illustration, when I first moved into my house, the closest, fastest, cheapest place for me to go see a movie was in Windsor. So I used to hop, from my house, and I'd go over the bridge, and I would watch a movie. And when the trade policies passed, we now have 10,000 trucks crossing that bridge, and I wouldn't even think of trying to do that on any day. And so that just displaced me in the community. And where I live is across I-75 and about 2 miles from the Delray community, which is the location of where the new proposed bridge to Canada is going to land. So about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I was hired to work at a small nonprofit organization in our community, and part of that project was to work on, it wasn't to work on this bridge, but second day on the job, the community had decided, after many years, that of being impacted by transportation projects, that they wanted to pursue a community benefit strategy around the new bridge. At that time, it had already been a few years that the community was involved. People have been engaged in the project, in many projects through like MDOT, and so there were community engagement meetings that have been held, and so they've been engaged a lot. There were a lot of watercolor drawings done. There were meetings about what they wanted the community to look like at that point. So it was really after that point where they'd had all this engagement and, were told this is what was going to happen, but people realized that they really didn't have power in this situation. And so the organizations in the community who had been through a previous fight around another transportation project called the Detroit Intermodal Freight Terminal Project, which was to expand the state's largest rail yard. In that situation, just as a backdrop to this, in that situation, the community organized, there were thousands of supporters in the community trying to fight for a community benefits agreement. They did call it that at the time. But in the end, they did not get a signed agreement. And so they have nothing legally binding to stand on. But what they did do is they succeeded by those numbers, by having that power, the credibility of everybody agreeing with what should happen in that project. They did succeed in meeting with the railroads, and they changed conditions of the plan. So they got the number of exits and entrances to the rail yard reduced from 10 to 4. And that was going to have significant impacts positively to improve their exposure to the trucks, the traffic and everything. But they got other promises, and they were sort of all happy in the end that those other things didn't happen. So this speaks to the fight of the Community Benefits Coalition, which was at the outset to say that we were going to come together, and the bottom line for us was going to be a legally binding agreement. Okay, so what I want to start out too by saying is that what I'm about to tell you, I was trying to decide, and I didn't really understand who this audience was. And so from the opening presentation, which I very much appreciated, that this is a group that you're unlike other groups that I usually talk to. I'm usually talking to people who are more against community benefits, okay? And so this is a bit different. But the things that are different about this struggle, it's super complex. So I'm going to try to give you information that I hope is useful to you tonight. Maybe it'll spark some questions. But I always really focus on the community. And because I feel like you have to have an understanding of the community to also understand that every community benefits fight is not the same. There's not a template for how to conduct these. They're all different, and there are always different opportunities that exist, not just a set of opportunities that's static, one set of opportunities, but it's changing constantly, okay? And so much has changed in our struggle that it's like been a fast-moving train in one sense, and also an incredibly slow process. So really the community has been engaged for about 10 years in this, and so you understand, like that's when the idea of a new bridge came up, and about 5 years into it we formed this coalition, and now we're at 5.5 years roughly, and so there's a lot of fatigue also when it's a complex situation. So this was the opening mission of this organization, to invest, essentially, we envision a community in which area residents and a new publicly owned international border crossing will coexist and benefit from one another. This is the idea of a win-win project. What's also different about our project is that, so I said it's complex. International, I'm going to be telling you all the different entities that have been involved in this. But also, most community benefit struggles, and I wanted to ask Curtis this. The residents started off by saying no, right, to the development, or not?
They threatened to not sign off on it. That
Not
was
sign
the
off on it.
leverage.
So that was no. They said no at first. And often, so in most cases, the community's saying no, and there's a known developer. There's a known entity sitting already on the other side of the table. We are nowhere near that yet. So all these years of all this going on, the people at the table have constantly been changing, okay? And I guess the other thing is that the position of the community, with the Detroit Intermodal Freight Terminal project, which immediately preceded this, the community did say no. That's how, they had all the people organized under the no, but they didn't take it far enough to get the guarantees, to get the, and people kind of, their sellout things that happened along the way, and people not speaking for the community, and that's a super duper important part, that the community really, that there's a trusting relationship, and the community's always really speaking for itself, or who's ever at the table, whatever table it is speaking for the community. So sometimes your personal beliefs differ from the community if you're out representing. So the bridge, the current bridge, and the community where it's at, and this is the flow of traffic. This is the country's most important crossing, most important connection. There's $40 billion of trade that goes across the bridge, and that's why. And I'll tell you why the bridge project is so important, not to us as a community, but to both governments of the U.S. and Canada. Is that this bridge would provide a direct freeway-to-freeway connection between the U.S. and Canada. So right now, crossing the existing bridge, which is 80-some years old, you have 17 traffic lights, I think it is, when you get to the Canadian side. Time is money, and so they want that direct freeway-to-freeway connection. So supporting this project, it's little old Delray, which I'm going to tell you about here. It was an immigrant community, many, it's a melting pot. It's like a microcosm of like all the immigration that's gone on in the U.S. There's been a history of Hungarians that moved in. People talk about, still people are alive today, talk about gypsy music. You could always hear it, in the community. All kinds of stuff like that. Right now, the community is the most diverse in the city of Detroit. Roughly about 5 years ago, it's been shifting, but it was roughly about thirds African American, Latino, of various countries, not just Mexico, all over Latin America, and the various European ethnicities. Very few resources is still left in the community, but Fort Wayne is one of the amazing ones. And so part of the project, we always tell people is, we're in Southwest Detroit, we're in the most growing, demographically most growing part of the city, statistically speaking, and that mostly has been spurred by all the immigration that's occurred. A lot of immigrants that have moved in over the last 20 years, it's changed dramatically. When I moved in, nothing was really new in town. If you go down Verner now, it's bustling, and that's from the immigrants who came and established businesses. But Fort Wayne is our only connection, our only green space and connection to the riverfront. So we've always said that part of the vision of the community was to be better connected to the beautiful resources we have. And Fort Wayne is suffering from a dramatic need, and a great need, I should say, for resources. Like $25 million is needed just to do improvements on the roofs and things like that to save these structures. So it's part of what we've been asking for as a community. And so this is Mr. Green from Green's Variety Store. I said there are very few resources. There are about 2 little teeny markets left in Delray. Delray used to be along Jefferson Avenue, connected to downtown. People moved there, the immigrants that came in moved there for jobs, could walk to work. Factories moved out. People are left without not just those jobs, but Jefferson was cut off. And the highways over time were built, so it's like an island with no resources where 40% of the people don't drive. But Mr. Green has had this store for over 50 years, and he is now being threatened. I'll just put this out there, it's terrible, because a lot of the people in the community who do manage to do things are also suffering from, they don't have the services in the community anymore in Delray, because there are sort of unwritten policies that are affecting the distribution of resources and where things are, it doesn't have the resources that Midtown has, and so they're suffering even greater in Delray, not only for the fact that the bridge has been coming, so there are people coming around and buying up the properties, and but the jumping is outrageous. So if you haven't been to Delray and you want to see what's going on in the city of Detroit, I mean, I know that there are other neighborhoods as well, but there are homes that have been burned out and just, it looks like bombs went off in Delray right now, to be honest. This is a picture of the industry, and it mixed with residents in Southwest Detroit. We're unique in that way across the city as well because we live so close to the industry. It's an area where we have nearby the state's only oil refinery, Marathon. You all know about that now in the news. And Zug Island, we have coal-fired power plants still, DTE nearby, the steel mills. I could go on and on. But it's a very high impact to the area already. Okay, surrounded by industries that serve Michigan, not just our community. And so you can see people live way too close to these things, and that's been, historical. But this illustration here, it shows that despite what it looks like, this is the view if you're sitting in this house directly across the street, that people have invested still to keep up their property, which is not typically what you think of. But the homes across Southwest Detroit, because of this mix of industry, are too close to the impacts. And you see this all over in Southwest. Transportation. This is our only recreation center, and those are the incinerator stacks from the wastewater treatment plant. There are 14 incinerators actually. There's some changes that are positive that are going on there now because being forced by EPA improvements to regulations. But since the bridge has been coming, the school's closed. High school just closed last year. This is the only place for kids to play, and I don't have a slide in here that shows the rubble left of the houses that have not been taken down that we asked about 2 years ago for the city to address. And there are kids in Delray. So this is, the kids who come to play at this recreation center still, even though these impacts are surrounding them. The project footprint is a 160-acre customs plaza. This is the Detroit River, Fort Wayne. 160 acres here. The impacts are going to be about half the population will be taken out of this area, and about half will be taken out because they have to widen I-75 to accommodate these ramps. So all the houses along the top here on the service drive, as well as each of the streets that abut the service drive, about 1 to 3 houses, depends on the final plan. Okay, this might shrink a little bit in size, but this is the planned acquisition area. And the other thing I want to say is that there are people who are going to be significantly impacted because trucks are going to come on and off here, and they're going to live right next to this. And according to federal relocation law, you can't buy anyone who's not in the actual footprint. So they're going to be stuck with the impacts. And so our reason for pursuing our community benefit strategy is because the minimum guarantees through the federal process are not going to take care of this. So needing to expand. So plenty of impacts, 250 households affected, it's about 700 people, 43 businesses, 5 churches. I just mentioned there are people who will be stranded on either side of the project. And traffic's predicted to increase 128% at this place. So high impacts already. We've got community with high asthma. And I'm saying all this because this is the kind of community where we're trying to negotiate something. And this presentation is the kind of presentation we've given over and over and over again to the decision makers on the project. So what we've been asking for is pretty typical of community benefits agreements. Environmental protections for the increased impacts, so the air quality and trucks off the residential streets. Getting investment to improve the housing that will remain in the community, and access to services, as it says, and access to the hiring of the jobs that will be created. So some way that local people will get access to those jobs. In a federal project, you're actually not allowed to preferentially hire people from a local geography. Everybody in the U.S. has to have equal access because it's on federal tax dollars. The thing about this particular project is there's different pots of money at play here now. Canada's funding part of it, the U.S. is funding part of it. So there might be different opportunities for pieces of community benefits to come from different spots, different ways. This is what a lot of people think of when they see Delray, but this is also homes in Delray, people living there. And so the bottom line request for us has been that there be, bottom line request really is that either there need to be concrete improvements improvements with this project to really make it win-win, that's going to improve people's quality of life, or there need to be offers to buy everyone else out. Because 5 years ago, when we first sat down with the Michigan Department of Transportation, MDOT, the community said, just buy everyone out. We have too much going on here already, too many impacts. And MDOT said we can't do that. Then, okay, well, we're pursuing the community benefit strategy then. Here's another one, the markets. It's really bad right now. This is what it looks like right now all over Delray. Typical, this is the community, organized community cleanups. This is a slide that's just illustrating the political complexity that's been going on. So this is not a regular eviction notice. This was a political flyer. I'll get into a second. But the Ambassador Bridge Company, this has been a serious fight. You've seen it in the news that the current bridge owner does not want to obviously give up anything from his business, and so he hired people to come in from out of town to put these flyers on people's doors. But people believed that they were real, and what it really was trying to get their attention to expose one of the state representatives who they wanted to know, which bridge do you support, the public bridge or the private bridge? And so we've had to contend with a lot of different things. So again, really what people want is there are these few resources that we want to be enhanced. And so again, the community benefits, this is really our community benefits card, a simple message that we've been handing out for years. And some of the wins that we had, I'm actually going to skip over this and talk about something else. So some of the entities that, just to tell you, have been involved in this struggle include, or let me just say, we've had to approach the city council, the city leadership, the state leadership, state agencies, the governor's office, the DEGC, Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, the legislature. All of these different entities have had different political stakes in this project. And so over the past 5 years, we've been able to get incremental things to happen. So I wanted to let you know that one of them was when it was in the state legislature a couple of years ago, we were able to, working with our state representative, we were able to get a piece of legislation passed through the House of Representatives. And what this did was, as far as we know, we were the first ones to do this because we reached out for national help and people said to us, even though there's tons of experience with community benefits, there's not the experience of having to go before a legislature to do it. And so we really didn't want to be in that arena, but that's where we were forced to go. And luckily, I tell you, I don't know if it would have happened with any other state legislator other than our representative, Rashida Tlaib, who was willing to work with us. And so we found ourselves going, and it kind of looked like lobbying, but really what we were doing is going and educating residents from the community. So we had, after a while, there were over 60 residents who made multiple trips, going and meeting with people, giving presentations before committees, and really convincing people that it's important to take care of this community. So a piece of legislation got passed through the House one year, calling for community benefits, but then it was shut down again. So where we found ourselves at after that was to try to fight again the following year, bring back legislation, go before committees again. So it's a very exhausting process. And then finally last year, the governor backed out of working with the legislature on it, found a different way, and so what that led to was last June, mid-June, there was a U.S.-Canada agreement signed. And through all of our struggle that we've been through, there was a recognition that they wanted supposedly to address community benefits, and so there's minimal language in that agreement that says, at this point in time, this is where we're at now, that minimum language says that when a developer is hired for the project, when they send out the request for proposals for the project, the developer must show how they've done community benefits before. And then when they send out the request for, qualifications, that's the first one. Developer must show that they've done community benefits. And then for the request for proposals, they actually have to show what community benefits they're going to provide. Now, that sounds good, but there are no specifics in it. And in the legislation, it specifically delineated the things that we were looking for. And so it also doesn't say how the community is going to be involved. So we're still in this fight very much so in order to get something concrete, because we don't have something concrete yet. And so now where we're at is people may have heard that the presidential permit was signed on this project, and that means the project can move forward, but it still has some hurdles to cross. They had created an international authority, and also the bidding process for this bridge is delayed until they get funding from the federal government. So you can see all this is pretty complex. And I think that what I wanted to do was say, how is it that we've gotten anywhere in this really complex situation with a community that is very poor, very distressed, few numbers, you know, how is it happening? First of all, the people in Delray are super passionate about their community, and as a lot of people are in communities in Detroit neighborhoods. And they feel like something has really been stolen from them. And it has. And I have to tell you how hard it's been for 5 years to, I was just thinking the other day, because we did some canvassing last week. We had a big meeting last night, 200 people came. And the thing that's really tough is if you had a time-lapse camera and you saw the decline happening in this community, that's very hard for this community to hang on. But they're hanging on to the roots that were there, you know, at this point. And so we're really at this, we've been saying for a couple of years now that Delray is at a tipping point. And how are we actually going to keep people, you know, engaged and involved in this? And it's very difficult. The community is mostly older. When people are poor, they don't have the same access to do things, to volunteer and stuff. So really what we've done is had people out just telling their story. I know it sounds really basic, but you have to know when and where to tell that story. So for a while it was we were going to the legislature. We went to city council. With city council we were able to, we just brought people to meetings and we had people say, this is what's like, this is what's happening. So council passed a resolution, 3 times passed resolutions in support. The final one was saying that, unanimous resolution saying they support providing community benefits in exchange for the project. The city owns 70% of the land. The city council is going to have to make a decision about that. Is the council going to ask for community benefits when it comes up? It's a little bit scary. Now there's an emergency manager. What power do they have to actually make that kind of demand? So that was one thing. And you know, I just told you about the legislature. The governor we got when he was elected, we got him to come into town, and he came into town and told the community that he supported community benefits. He supported there being good things to happen in the community, okay? And so we keep saying that over and over again. In fact, what he said was, more specifically, he said, if you're standing in eyeshot of the new bridge, it should be a beautiful place, just like the Mackinac Island Bridge without, you know? There's a big difference. You know, there's a big difference in what this looks like. But we keep repeating it. We agree. It should be a beautiful place. Yeah. You know? And so that's what we keep saying, trying to hold people accountable to what they say and trying to tell them that they need to be accountable. So I think one thing is for all levels of decision makers, and I'll back up, this was one, we had several times like call-in days. We had call-in days to council, call-in days to the mayor's office, call-in days to whoever at the time was important to put pressure on. And one time when we were focusing on the mayor's office, for example, they were so upset by the number of calls that the mayor called the governor and said, get these people off of us. Yeah, so hundreds of calls placed. And, but to tell you the truth, we don't feel that powerful. We feel very unpowerful, actually. And with the constant moving target and all these different arenas, it's hard to know what kind of effect you're having. But I think that, so one of the strategies has really been to focus on this is a moral issue. And I think a lot of the struggles that probably a lot of us in this room have been involved in, we always feel like, can't people see it's the right thing to do? But I'll tell you, one of the cards we haven't played yet really is talking about the potential shame. If this is a $40 billion a year venture, like the moving $40 billion a year across this bridge, they're going to be investing $6 billion. We connected at every point that we could, really rub 2 sticks together. We got research done by universities, okay, to help us with little things. So sometimes a professor would tell us, hey, maybe I can get a student to help you on something. So, for example, we thought, okay, this bridge, I didn't say this, but when we first started, I was asking Curtis, did they say no? Okay, Delray residents said no. When they were first trying to figure out where to build the bridge, they were looking at locations up and down the Detroit River. The problem was, in other communities, thousands of people came out and said no. In Delray, it was just a couple hundred people that said no. So there were lots of factors where we would have liked to have continued saying no, but we were at the narrowest point of the river, the cheapest, poorest community with the cheapest land, the most available land of the cities, 70% of the land, by the city. So the community said, how are we going to say no? How are we really legitimately going to say no at that point in time as this distressed little community with no political agency, barely any people voted? How are we really going to do it? And so we said yes, but, which is we will support this project only if there are community benefits. Slight variation on people saying, because there wasn't somebody on the other side of the table already. There's no one hired. It went from, it was in the legislature. Well, actually, no. Initially, it was in MDOT's hands. Met with MDOT all the time, realizing they have no power over this really. Then it, went to the legislature. And so in each of these phases, we didn't feel like we had the power to, really stop it. So we tried to figure out what we could do. So we, had this campaign really saying, what would you do if it was in your community? And making that public. What would you do if it's in your community? And repeating that in the media. So I think that I wanted to just say something about Tova's questions because I think that we did a good job of some things, and there are other things that it's hard to do a good job of. And the major thing that makes it hard is resources. Sometimes if you're in a certain community and, a community meeting, you say, okay, let's everybody chip in, throw $5 into this can. People don't have that even, And so if you don't have anyone going to bat for you, and then you have all this political divide going on, which bridge, this bridge, that bridge, all that stuff, it makes it just really, really difficult to move forward. And so I think that those resources limit us in a lot of ways. And but we did a good job of describing the damage. That was really where I think so far we're really good on describing the damage, and we were good on giving options for the mitigations, and telling people there are all alternatives. You could, in order to make this a viable, good project, and have it be win-win, there are things that you can do to make it better. And right now, what's interesting about where it's at is that Canada has done so much on their side that we're pointing and saying, okay, Canada's sort of in the driver's seat a little bit, but why, can you make it look like Canada over on this side? They're trying to plant, restore the native grasses and everything at the entryway of their country, whereas the entryway of our country is going to be, we're putting this, $6 billion project right over one of the most distressed, poorest communities. And I was saying, I'm sorry, we had somebody do research, for example, on the value of the land, and we said, you could not build this bridge in any other community because each parcel of land, if you went up or down river, it totally would be unaffordable, so don't do it on the backs of the people. So right now, it's been like, a moral strategy and a moral fight, and I think that we just have to keep carrying that message, and we have to keep looking for who we can make alliances with and how we can get agreements about moving the project forward. And I really must apologize, because I know it's a very strange and complex situation, but I feel like it's important to know that it can be that way with communities. But it's quite different than other community benefit struggles, and I hope that there can be lessons, and maybe there can be more questions. So.